You can usually spot an amateur by looking at their edges. You'll find random sharp edges everywhere, or overly smudged tones that hide uncertainty and mistakes instead of communicating form. So let's learn about the different types of edges and when to use them. So what is an edge? An edge refers to the transition between shapes, and more specifically, how fast the shapes transition from one to the other. There's an edge between all shapes that touch, and one shape can share an edge with several other shapes. They're kind of like borders between countries. The key difference between borders and edges in art is that a border is always sharp, a very specific line where one place becomes the other. There's no gradual transition. You're either here or there. But an edge can be sharp or soft, and that softness exists on a spectrum. It could be just a little bit soft or very, very soft, a long gradation. So let's talk about the types of edges. There are an infinite amount of edge types between sharp and soft. But just like with values, even though they are infinite within that range, we simplify them to a limited amount to make it easier to organize our drawings, to be able to keep this stuff in our head and make decisions. It's a lot easier to think about 5 values and 4 edges: sharp, firm, soft, and lost. Lost is actually off the spectrum a little. It carries more meaning than just a very soft. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So we've got 2 shapes, a black rectangle and a white rectangle, and there's an edge between them. This edge is a sharp edge, like a razor blade. There's absolutely no transition, just a sudden break between the two. When we blur out just a little bit, just a teeny tiny bit, it's not very sharp anymore. If your knife cut like this, you wouldn't call it sharp. So we call this a firm edge. There's still a clear boundary, but it doesn't cut your eyeballs. And blur it out even more, and we got a soft edge, drifting into that poofy cloud territory. And if we blur it out so much that we no longer see the edge, the 2 shapes just merge into one big shape, that's a lost edge. But lost edges don't always mean that it's super blurry between the 2 shapes. Sometimes it just means you've made the values of 2 neighboring shapes identical, effectively losing their boundary. It becomes one shape. You might spot this on the shadow side of a figure or a portrait, where it melts into the background. You might choose not to separate the skin from the background with different values, even if you see a different value in reality or in the reference. In that case, the lost edge isn't about blurring the boundaries, it's about using matching values, so one form merges with another. Value contrast and edges. The value contrast between the shapes plays a role in how important the edge is in the overall picture. I mean, they're all important, but the edges between high contrasting values are more noticeable, and they reveal more of the 3D form. That's why it's common to prioritize defining the shadow edges first, the edges between the lights and shadows. Those have the most contrast and also a lot of variety in the types of edges. The edges between the light and shadow are the core shadows and the cast shadows. And I think those are so important that we're gonna have a dedicated project to practice defining those edges. If you want to participate in these projects and get all the other lessons, demonstrations, and critiques from this course, go check out the full Drawing Basics course at proko.com/drawing. You might hear people referring to edge quality. They're not talking about whether the edges are good or bad. They're referring to the characteristics and relationships of the edges. They're referring to sharpness and softness, and how edges are handled, how they're actually executed with the medium. One way to use a sharp edge is to just use the eraser. Pick it out like this, and the eraser can create a sharp edge. You can make that edge feel a little bit sharper by putting a subtle line between them, increasing the contrast. A soft edge could be created by gradually lifting the side of the pencil to slowly transition the value from one to the other. And that's common sense, I guess. But you could be more creative with how you execute a soft edge. You can use a blending stick, a chamois, or even your finger. You can break up the edge, making the shapes look like they have some moving energy between them. You can incorporate various textures. All of these have different effects and they feel different. They're all soft edges with a different flavor. All shapes have edges. So this doesn't just apply to silhouettes, the edges around the outside of an object. It also applies to edges between shapes within an object. Plane changes, changes in local color, cast shadows, highlights. Any distinct shape has an edge around every side. Sometimes the edge changes as it travels along a form. For example, the core shadow is almost sharp at the bony tendinous wrist, but it slowly softens as it transitions toward the muscular part of the forearm. Even a single shape can have a changing edge around it. This shadow shape on the inside of the eye socket is sharp here, firm here, and soft here as the form wraps over the brow ridge. So how do you know when to use each type of edge? When to use a sharp edge? When to use a firm edge? When to use a soft edge? Is it random? Does it even matter? Well, it definitely matters. The main thing edges do is communicate 3D form. Edges are influenced by things like the light source, the composition, our preferences and style, but understanding their connection to form, that's the foundation. They indicate how rounded or sudden a transition is between two planes. We know that this value change indicates a plane change. And since the edge between the values is sharp, the plane change is sudden, a sharp corner. A firm edge would suggest a kind of rounded corner. A soft edge suggests a large round form. Sharp edge, sharp transition between planes. Soft edge, soft transition between planes. So that's the form shadows. But remember, we also have cast shadows. The edge on a cast shadow can describe the type of light source. A diffused light, like a cloudy sky, creates very soft cast shadows. A direct light source, like the sun or a light bulb, creates sharper cast shadows. But wait, there's more. The edge type of a cast shadow can describe the distance between the object casting and the object receiving the cast shadow. This cast shadow gets sharper as the objects get closer together, razor sharp where they touch. We can exaggerate this effect even within small distances. For example, I like to make the cast shadow from the nose really sharp right by the nostrils and firm at the bottom. Beyond 3D form. But like I said, edges are not just used to reveal 3D form. You'll see various edge qualities in all sorts of places. You see a soft glowing edge around this light bulb. This isn't showing a 3D form. This is just showing that it's glowing. The light rays are kind of radiating out. There's a transition from light blue to dark blue in the sky. Again, that's not 3D form. You might also have compositional or design reasons to put certain edges in certain places. You're an artist. Once you understand what edges do naturally, you can bend the rules for artistic effect. You want to create a focal point? Sharpen those edges. You need to push something into the background? Soften it up. You want to simplify a busy area? Lose some edges by matching values. You can group shapes together, create mood, guide the eye, all by playing with edges. The masters do it all the time. They'll sharpen an edge that should be soft to draw your attention. They'll lose edges that were clearly visible to simplify the design. They know the rules, so they know how to break them. How to get good at edges. So how do you learn the rules? Well, I think it's through observation and practice. Draw from life. Pay attention to edges. Try to replicate them as close as possible to reality. See how edges behave differently under various lighting conditions. Start by learning how to use edges to indicate form, then add the compositional design stuff later. Every time you shade, make edge decisions. Don't default to sharp edges everywhere anymore. we're moving past that now. Think about each edge. Is it sharp, firm, soft, lost? Make it a conscious choice. So edges are powerful tools. Edges create depth. Edges help control where the focus is. Edges are handy tools to play with style. And edges play a big role in modeling form. They are essential for creating realistic shading and three-dimensional volume. If you want to get better at shading, and if you want exercises, projects, demonstrations that will help you practice shading deliberately so you can draw like this, join my Drawing Basics course over at proko.com/drawing. The 20% off sale on the course is ending this Sunday at midnight, so don't wait too long. We've already covered line quality, shape design, perspective, and values, and now we're doing the final section on edges to take your shading to the next level. Join us at proko.com/drawing.